He might actually be the most derivative one of all. I mean, Christ, the same house.
Maybe so. But you forgot the first rule of surviving a stab movie. Never answer the...
I'm bored.
Wait!
And welcome back to Horror Queers. We're talking spit play and bumper taps. We're talking Get Going, Sweethearts. And we're talking Cutie Pie C. Thomas Howell. And I'm Joe.
And I'm Trace, and we're discussing just how far an older gay dude will go to eat a young twink's butt.
Yes, we are.
Everyone, we are discussing The Hitcher, and if you follow us on socials, you may be aware that we actually did a live show on The Hitcher at Salem Horror Fest back in April. We were going to actually just post that recording of it, but I done fucked up, and it didn't record. So you're getting a brand new, fresh episode on The Hitcher.
Yeah, so it'll sound very similar to those of you who were kind enough to join us. And by the way, thank you to Kay and Salem Horror Fest for inviting us, and to everyone who came out and, told us their stories and were vulnerable. It was lovely to meet people in person. God, what a delight, right? But we're going to try to recreate some of that experience, but obviously it's not as much fun because we got to clap back at audience members. There was that one old lady who was in the wrong theater and you made a rim job joke and she was like, "What show is this?"
Yeah, she did not know what she was in for, so she walked out.
So unfortunately, you will not get to hear her say something like that on this audio recording.
No, but we are going to mimic the format we did for that live show. So this may not be like a supersized 2-hour jumbo discussion of The Hitcher, but we're still gonna get all up in this bitch.
You know what? We're gonna tap your own bumper and then we're gonna say goodnight.
But I guess, okay, wait, Joe, so what is your connection with this film? Because I confess, so when we decided to program this for Salem Horror Fest, we were having some issues because the theme of the festival this year was folk horror, and nothing was really like screaming out at us. We didn't have a strong connection with a lot of, especially queer folk horror films, and then Kay brought up The Hitcher, and it was like, oh, why not? Because what are urban legends but folk horror? Yeah,
indeed. This seemed like a surprisingly good fit, albeit a bit of a surprising choice, right?
Yeah, so I confess, I actually don't think I saw this film until a little bit later. I think I was in high school, but I actually think I saw the sequel, the direct-to-video sequel, The Hitcher 2, I've Been Waiting.
Oh my god, that title.
I know, on Sci-Fi first. And then I think because of that, I was like, oh, The Hitcher's a famous film, blah, blah, I'll seek it out. I will confess, when I first saw The Hitcher, I wasn't a huge fan. I didn't dislike it. But it was very much where's all the blood and gore? It's not very scary. I'm kind of bored by this, and I like it a lot more now. I appreciate it a lot more now. It's still not one of my favorite films, but it's definitely like risen in the ranks over the decades.
Yeah, I think I also saw it quite a bit later. I think I checked it out when I was doing research for my slasher college course that I was teaching. I was trying to cross off a bunch of, just gaps in my general watching knowledge. And kind of like you, I was surprised because I thought it was going to be something different than what it actually is, which, if you look at reviews, a lot of people say, oh, this is kind of like the Terminator with a hitchhiker instead of a killer robot from the future. And I can definitely see that, in some ways I've seen people say, oh, it's more of a thriller film, it's more of an action film. I think all of those things apply, but particularly from a queer perspective, there's a lot of horrific things that go on if you read either of these two leads as queer.
Yes, and there's absolutely, we will at least be reading one of them as queer for sure, the titular Hitcher. Everyone, we are going to be reading Rutger Hauer's character as a gay man because, honestly, it's kind of hard not to, given what the film does.
Well, that is one of the other big surprises, right? Is the number of straight bros who want to say there's nothing queer in this. There's no homoerotic tension. There's no undertones. And I mean, we're going to make a lot of jokes throughout this. We're going to talk about, the kind of undertones where if you wanted to look sideways and not see what's right there in front of your fucking face, you could make the argument, sure, it's just an action film. But the reality is, this shit is fucking gay.
Yeah. Very, very gay. And we will go through all the gay things we found because, oh boy, did I watch this movie about 4 to 5 times the week of this live show?
Yes. I'm excited to see my letterbox stats on this film by the end of the year.
Oh my god, it's gonna fuck up all my stats. I'm so mad about this.
Favorite actor, Rutger Hauer. You know what? Checks out.
Okay, well, before we get into the production, everyone, so we have two sources we're going to pull from. We have Tim Grierson's Inside the Unsettling Homoerotic Terror of the Hitcher, which was posted on Mel Magazine. And we also have Marcus Lindenberg's How to Make a Monster, the Homosexual Experience in Horror and Thriller Cinema. So we'll pull a couple quotes from that throughout this, but let's jump in, shall we?
Absolutely. So, Trace, there isn't a convoluted backstory to this, and yet it is a bit robust.
More than I thought. I will confess, when we got this, I was kind of like, I don't really know a lot about this movie. Of course, that can all be fixed with research, which I did, and you did. But I was kind of like, what interesting things could there be about this film? So, screenwriter Eric Red, everyone, he actually a previous Horror Queers alumni. He was the screenwriter for Near Dark, the Catherine Bigelow vampire movie we discussed last year.
Yeah, so apparently dude loves him a Western homoerotic thriller. Yes. I think that's also why I never gravitated towards this movie, because the desert setting is just not really appealing to me. That is true. Yeah, that was something you and I had a lot of conversations about. You know, it's gorgeous. I think it contributes really significantly to the tension of this film because Jim, the C. Thomas Howell character, is so isolated, and you really get the feel for that in these extreme long shots.
Yeah.
And yet you and I, you know, there's a couple of genres that you and I don't have the strongest affinity for: war films and also Westerns. So these sometimes take that extra jump to get over the hurdle.
Well, and I think honestly though, like finding all these queer things in this film made me like it more, because I think in the past I was kind of like, it's just kind of a bro movie.
Yeah, I mean, I made the kind of facetious offhand remark, oh, you could just turn your nose at it and not see it. But the reality is there's large chunks of this which play out like a conventional 80s action film, right? It's trucks and cars go boom real good.
Honestly, some of these car scenes I had completely forgotten about. And I was like, oh, because I guess in my head, I always envisioned this being a low budget film. And it very much was not a low budget film. So, and that money went to good use in those action scenes.
It's true. But sorry, I interrupted you and got you off on a big tangent. Tell me more about Eric Red.
Okay. So yeah, Eric Red was not getting any work in New York City, so he takes a cross-country road trip from New York City to Austin. He's like, yeah, sure, what am I going to do? I'm going to move to Austin, Texas. And as a former Austinite myself, I support this decision.
And I'm sure, as anyone living in New York would say, big mistake.
Huge. But no, so on the way, he picks up a hitchhiker because he's falling, much like Jim in the opening scene of this film, he's falling asleep, it's raining, he's like worried he's going to get into a car wreck, so he picks up a hitchhiker, and thankfully, nothing bad happened. Like, this wasn't a Rutger Hauer situation, but he was unsettled by the guy he picked up. He said that he was just sitting there, staring at him, smelling dirty.
I still find that quote so offensive.
I know.
Like, oh God, this man was smelling horribly.
But you look dirty. You don't smell dirty.
Exactly.
Anyway. So he pulled up to a gas station. He politely told him to get out, and the guy got out. So whatever. So he finally makes it to Austin, and this idea of this hitchhiker just stays in his head. So during his 7-month stay in Austin, which I'm like, okay, you only were there for 7 months? Like, what?
You don't know what his struggle was.
That's true. It's true. It was the 80s. This is like 1981, 82, 83. So yeah, he drives a taxi cab for work, and during this time, he's moonlighting writing the script for The Hitcher. So in 83, he sends a letter to several Hollywood producers with this note, and I quote, "The story grabs you by the guts and does not let up, and it does not let go. When you read it, you will not sleep for a week. When the movie is made, the country will not sleep for a week." That's some high self-praise.
It is indeed. And it almost makes me think, oh, wow, he should have written log lines or taglines for movies, because that's a bit of a humdinger.
Honestly, why didn't they use it for this one? They should have, but
it is surprising that they didn't use it. Yeah.
So anyway, I don't know if he got a lot of like, oh yeah, like send me this thing that you're hyping up so much. But eventually, script development executive David Bombick received a copy of his letter, and he was so intrigued. He was like, you know what? Yes, please send me a copy of your script.
So it worked.
It did work, but what Red didn't say was that his script was 190 pages long.
No.
I know. And so for everyone not in the know, usually the rule of thumb is 1 page of a script equals 1 minute of screen time. So we are looking at a 3+ hour version of The Hitcher.
Yeah.
The audacity of this man.
I am going to say no to that. Although we should also acknowledge a lot of people write scripts and then you have to rewrite them, or you get edits and notes that say, this is 3 hours long and we're not making it, so cut it down.
For sure. And that's exactly what happened here, you know? Apparently the script also was very, very, very violent. Like, there were more death scenes, but it was also more explicit in how we had to show them in the film, which, as anyone who's seen this film knows, that we don't really do that. We take the Texas Chainsaw Massacre approach where we are hiding a lot of the violence, and that's why I like this movie more now, though, is because I did remember it being more violent, and it has that effect where it's so exhausting, it's so intense, that you remember it being a lot gorier than it actually is.
Yeah, and we'll talk more about that when we get to the critiques, because I think that plays a huge part.
100%. So the script was intriguing enough, but again, Bombeck thought it was too violent. So he and his personal manager, Kip Oman, got Red to move out to LA so they could all tweak. Oh, maybe that's why he was only in Austin for 7 months.
You fucker.
So yeah, he moved it to LA, and they all tweaked the script together before showing it to their boss, producer Ed Feldman, and his partner Charles Meeker. And the intent was to remove some more of the exploitation-y elements of the film and to stop it from becoming a slasher film. And I was kind of like, we're still doing this back then? But I guess, like, 1986, right? Like, this is the heyday of the slasher boom, and if you are a slasher, you are quote-unquote less than. You are a sub-film, according to film critics.
Right. I also wonder if at this point they were starting to see, okay, the big slashers are the franchises, but also the slasher was really having its heyday in 80, 81. So by the time this film comes along, even though it's only a year or two later that this script is in development, I wonder if they were already looking at the kind of depreciating results and saying, let's try to do something a little bit different to help it stand out.
Oh, you know what? That's also entirely possible. So, yeah, I actually don't even know if there was ever an intention to make a sequel to this film. Do you know?
I don't know. But the fact that it's so much later tells me no.
Well, this is also a flop, but we'll get there in a minute.
Well, there is that. Yeah, flops don't tend to get a lot of sequels.
So they spent 6 months reworking this script and removing, again, a lot of the repetitive violence. So I think it wasn't just the fact that it was really violent and it was too much like a slasher film. It was like, oh, it's just old by this point. We're just seeing the same shit over and over and over. What we really want to do is focus on the relationship between the Hitcher and the Jim character.
Right. Makes sense.
So enter Robert Harmon, who got his start as a photographer when he moved to LA, and he, of course, ends up being the director of this film, but his kind of like proof of concept, well, unintentionally so, because he didn't do it knowing he was going to get the Hitcher, but he made a short film called China Blue, starring Charles Napier, and truthfully, I was like, should I know who Charles Napier is? I only know him from the cop in Silence of the Lambs.
Oh, right. Yeah, the name sounded familiar, but I couldn't place it.
Yeah, he's the one that gets his face ripped off.
Oh, what a memorable role.
But Joe, you and I watched this. I'm in preparation for this live show because, and admittedly, we had the link for it. Everyone, this is available on YouTube. We will put it in the show notes. I opened it and I was like, oh, it's 35 minutes long. So it's a short-ish film.
It is a short film, as in emphasis on the film and not so much on the short.
But it's funny because Robert Harmon himself is a self-proclaimed, like, not horror guy.
Yeah, he's a Jim Gillespie.
Very much a Jim Gillespie. Which is really funny because if you look at his filmography after this film, he did like a Jean-Claude Van Damme movie in the early 90s. He did some straight-to-TV John Travolta movie before Travolta's Pulp Fiction career resurgence.
Oh, okay.
He also directed 2003, maybe 2004's Wes Craven Presents They, which is a horror movie and also not a very good one.
Yeah, the other fun thing that we discovered is apparently he has a very close relationship with Tom Selleck, so he has done a ton of that Blue Blood show.
The Blue Blood show, but also, okay, it's Jesse Stone movies. These are all TV movies. Okay, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, like 6. Oh my God, 8 of these movies between 2005 and 2015.
You know what? I love that for his golden toilet in some kind of luxury holiday property because no doubt the money was great.
I had never heard of this. And when I saw this list, I was like, Jesus. But you know what? Someone must be enjoying him.
Sure.
Oh,
sure.
shit. They is 2002, by the way. But he also did the 2003 film Highwayman with Rona Mitra and Jim Caviezel, which is more in line with The Hitcher in that it's a car movie. But again, it's kind of the thing where it's like it's a horror movie / thriller / suspense. So for a man who doesn't like horror, he sure does keep coming back to it.
Actually, so coming back around to this short, which, by the way, it's actually called China Lake, not China Blue.
Oh, my God. Where am I getting... China Blue is the name of a hooker in something.
I was going to say, I think that's a sex worker from another movie. But, folks, I would actually encourage you to check out China Lake because it is an interesting film, especially when you realize he doesn't know he's going to make The Hitcher. It literally is that proof of concept that you were talking about, Trace. The premise is surprisingly similar, only the Hitcher is actually a cop who is on vacation, and we just watch him have these encounters where during this vacation period, he decides to abuse his privilege as an officer of the law to just kill
fuck people over. Yeah.
It's actually very harrowing. It's incredibly well shot because I think that Rutger Harmon is a very good director. So it has a lot of similarities with The Hitcher, but it plays out differently. I will say the opening scene takes place in the police precinct and it's completely unimportant. Like Tracy, when I watched it and we just said, why would you open your short on this kind of mess of just diegetic sound that doesn't actually contribute to anything and doesn't have a good hook? Like it was baffling, but the rest of the short is quite good. Yeah,
well, that's the thing, because the opening scene is only meant to establish that, oh, there's a cop that's not there for roll call because he's on vacation. And it's like, we could have just, honestly, I'm sorry, I'm going to spoil it, but like the way I think it would have been good to have just remove that scene and have the end twist be like, oh, he's on vacation. And this is like, oh, this is what cops do on vacation. Like that, it would have been more of like a, oh shit, kind of a moment for me. But,
because it is an interesting interrogation of, very ACAB-y in some ways, suspiciously prescient in that regard. But also, it's very much trading in the themes of The Hitcher in addressing these issues of masculinity and like not a comedy of manners, but just how when we are confronted with intimidating figures, if they have authority over us, often we will sort of acquiesce to their demands in ways that could be very violent or threatening.
Yes. Also, the reason I kept thinking China Blue is because that is the name of Kathleen Turner's character in Crimes of Passion.
Yes, it is. That's how I knew it, because I just watched that a couple of months ago.
Anyway, though, but China Lake got Harmon notice, and so he got an agent to sign him, but he wasn't really liking any of the scripts that were sent his way, and so he finally just said yes to The Hitcher, partly because he did like it, didn't love it, but he liked it, and partly because he was feeling pressure from his agent to finally accept something, so he didn't want to be dropped by his agent for being a fucking idiot.
You know what? I don't love horror, but I guess if I have to make a movie, I should probably say yes to something.
Yes. So producers Feldman and Meeker optioned the film themselves, paying Eric Red $25,000. And because of the violence in the script, major studios like Universal Pictures and Warner Brothers passed on it, as did smaller ones like Orion Pictures and New World Pictures, which I would raise my eyebrow at, but honestly, because this film flopped, it would have probably put both of those companies out of business sooner than they already went.
Yeah, they had their own flops looming, so they didn't need this one.
Many executives did like the script, but the one scene that they all were like, nope, can't do that, is the Nash character's death scene, the Jennifer Jason Leigh death scene. Right.
Which arguably is the film's talkiest, buzziest moment.
Yes, but again, we don't see it happen. So, independent producer Donna Dobrow, Feldman's former employee, went to work for Silver Screen Partners / Home Box Office, aka HBO.
AKA
ANA. But she heard about the film and she asked Feldman for a copy of the script. And her boss liked it, along with Michael Fuchs, the HBO chairman and COO. So they needed his approval to get the film made. And he said, yep, you know what? I will do this, but we cannot tear that girl apart, and we have to reduce the violence in the film. So, I know. So they gave them a budget of $7.9 million.
Okay. Yeah, that is a healthy amount.
Yeah. Again, especially for inflation, that's probably close to $15 million today. Maybe a little bit more even.
Maybe a little more. Yeah, it might be closer to 20.
Yeah. So, I mean, that's 2 Blumhouse movies. Or 3.
Depending on if a female director
Exactly. Oh, yeah. So contractually, TriStar Pictures was obligated to distribute any film by HBO and Silver Screen. So they released it in almost 800 theaters on February 21st, 1986. It was the only new release that weekend, but it opened in the number 8 slot with $2.1 million.
Yikers. Okay.
Yeah. Other films that week that were not in their first week of release, but all these ones that beat it. Disney's first R-rated film, Down and Out in Beverly Hills. Wildcats, the Goldie Hawn football movie, which I don't like.
Just had to sneak that in there.
Yeah. The Color Purple, of course, and the Meryl Streep starring Out of Africa. Again, some of these movies were in their like 4th or 5th week of release, beating The Hitcher this weekend.
Okay, so what I'm hearing is that we needed a mature actress in the role of Nash. It's like, keep the ingenue idea, but have her played by Meryl Streep.
It's shit. It's really one of those things where I'm just like, this has to have been a marketing thing, I guess. I don't know. Like, it's not like there wasn't an appetite for this kind of stuff. Maybe the reviews heard it because, well, all right. So
speculate.
Okay. It goes on to gross $5.8 million domestically. Again, against that $7.9 million budget. So this film was a flop.
Yeah.
It got mixed reviews upon its release, and today we're looking at a 62% of Rotten Tomatoes with an average rating of 6 out of 10, but that includes a lot newer reviews.
Right.
So on Metacritic, we've got a 32 out of 100, and that's probably more accurate of what the general critical consensus was at the time.
Yeah, that is low.
Yeah.
Like, I could see not liking parts of this film, or like you and I, it's a Western, I'm not really intrigued by this, but 32 suggests it's just not a good movie.
Oh, I know, right? But that's where Letterboxd users come in handy, because they have given it a 7.2 out of 10. Because, yes, will we call this a cult classic?
I feel like, there's certain people who really fucking like this movie. So I can see people saying, it's got a small but dedicated audience.
Yeah, I would say so as well. But yeah, so common critiques. Let's throw Roger Ebert under the bus again. So,
you know what? He does it to himself.
I know. Ebert fucking hated this movie. The quote that I pulled from his review: "The Hitcher grants the Hauer character almost supernatural powers. Although that makes the movie impossible to accept on a realistic level, it didn't bother me." Oh
my God, he's you.
He's me. I could see that the film was meant as an allegory, not a documentary. But but on its own terms, this movie is diseased and corrupt. I would have admired it more if I had found the courage to acknowledge the real relationship it was portraying between Howell and Rutger. But no, it prefers to disguise itself as a violent thriller, and on that level, it is reprehensible.
Yeah, so we're also bearing the lead. I think he gave this 0 stars.
Yeah, it was like a no-star film, which he only reserved. I think it's in his book. Like, I hated this movie.
Yeah, he gives a lot of movies bad reviews, but he gives no stars to only a small select number of films. So yeah, this is a cult film because that puts it in a very small group of Roger Ebert hated movies.
It's in good company, though, because the Texas Chainsaw Massacre remake is in that group as well.
There we go. I will say one thing that stands out to me in this quote that you read is it seems like Ebert himself is hitting on the homoerotic undertones, right? He wants to see the relationship between Jim and John.
Well, and that's not something that only Ebert noticed. So again, if you're just listening to our show for the first time and you're like, guys, y'all are reaching, this isn't gay. Literally, so a quote from the Globe and Mail critic Jay Scott in 1986 described the film as a slasher movie about gay panic, a nasty piece of homophobic angst for the age of AIDS.
Yeah. When you and I were putting the research on this together, because we actually collaborated more on this than we normally do, because we wanted to make sure that the live show went off well. And we were both kind of joking, like, oh, it's a film with homoeroticism in the 80s, so of course we're going to have to talk about AIDS. But it is wild to see a review from the Times.
Yeah.
Just fully putting that out there. And the unfortunate thing about this is we both took a crack at trying to find this review to see if this is just a one-off line or if this is the basis of the whole review. I think it's probably behind the Globe and Mail's paywall, but we could not find anything more than this quote. So we don't have the context for what Scott is actually like. Is this put in context, or is this just him saying, blah? But I think that this is a really interesting review.
Yeah, I felt validation when I saw this quote. So
Right. There we go. There we go.
But yeah, I mean, otherwise, we have people calling it a nauseating thriller, a highly unimaginative slasher. The slasher designation is so interesting to me because I don't view this as much because none of the people that get killed in this film are actual characters, which I guess you could make that argument for a lot of slasher films of the 80s, but they are one-dimensional characters, but they are still characters with like a prominent place in the film, whereas in this movie, it's like cops show up and they get killed.
Right. Yeah, I mean, I personally wouldn't call this a slasher because I have a more narrowly defined approach to that subgenre. But I do think it's funny that if you want to read it as a slasher, sure, it is there because we've got this guy who's just going around picking people off. And yeah, they're not quite characters, and that's fairly common. But I think it's funny that you would then say, oh, okay, well, it's not adhering to a bunch of the things we're seeing in other films, like teenagers, smaller settings, some kind of mythology, backstory, trauma. And then for people to say, but it's unimaginative. It's like, well, actually, it's an unconventional slasher. I wouldn't use the word unimaginative.
Well, and to be fair, I mean, this film is considered a classic by today's standards, I feel like. But anyway, so yeah, that is how The Hitcher got made. Let's talk about some of these set pieces, right?
Okay, yeah. So we're going to spend a lot of time on two key sequences. And of course, those are the moments that feature Jim and John heavily. So the opening scene where we just see Jim, who is played by Baby Twink, C. Thomas Howell, who of course at this point was famous from roles in Red Dawn and The Outsiders. So he had that baby face charisma. He was very much a kind of soft boy where, oh, he's so cute and young and innocent. You want to protect him, which is great for the role of Jim. And I love that our introduction to him is literally him opening the door and saying, my mother told me not to do this.
Yeah, so it could be talking about hitchhiking, but she's really talking about fucking men.
Yeah, it's basically, mom told me to be careful around older men that I don't know. There is a lot of subtext in this movie, and we are going to have a lot of fun poking holes. No. And we are going to have a lot of fun poking fun at it. Having fun, poking fun.
I'm leaving that in because poking holes is too much of a fun double entendre.
It's true. But the reality is that so many of these choice lines and the decisions, I don't know if Howell was kind of in on this, but you definitely get the impression that Rutger Hauer is playing this as an intimacy between these two men. Well,
that's the thing, because Rutger Hauer, his performance is, I don't want to say one note, but he's very calm throughout this entire thing. He's very playful, and it feels like flirtation more than it feels like an angry killer, I guess.
Right, yeah, he's never getting angry at this, even during the violent outbursts. If anything, he seems sadistic, right? And we are going to gently venture into a potential S&M reading of this later on, but I think there's just a lot of different kind of queer attributes that end up applying to the John hitchhiker character.
Yeah. Now, when it comes to hitchhiking, have you ever hitchhiked? Do you have any experience with hitchhiking?
So I don't, but primarily because I don't drive, and my parents would never open the door for anybody.
I know for a fact that my parents hitchhiked once, in the 80s, but she quickly shut him up because she didn't want my dad to tell me that story.
It would ruin the image of Mama Trace.
And now I'm telling all of you.
There we go, yeah. So one of the interesting things that we found in the research was that there's actually a pretty substantial history of hitchhiking in the U.S. It's very much a part of the culture, but it shifts when we get into the Reagan 80s. So before that, it was a lot of GIs. It was a lot of men of color. So people who either couldn't afford cars or to travel on buses or trains, they would just hitchhike. And it was actually very common for people to do so. It wasn't a dangerous thing. And then suddenly we get into the 80s, and between Reagan and his conservative era, as well as J. Edgar Hoover, who has a queer backstory for himself. He's the head of the FBI, but he actually more or less created a print marketing campaign that warned people about the dangers of hitchhiking. And from that, he literally changed the culture, and we get things like the Hitcher as a result.
Reagan sounds like a real stand-up guy.
I mean, he and his wife were just pillars of the queer community. Did so much to help us. Definitely didn't fuck us over at all.
They loved the gays.
They loved the gays.
And it is a coincidence, but it also is, like, important. Like, this has also happened, like, during, like, the AIDS crisis and Reagan's lack of anything to do with it.
Yeah.
But yeah, so this is, I'm actually surprised we didn't get more hitchhiking movies. I guess, I mentioned the Texas Chainsaw Massacre earlier because that's another movie where I think, when you're talking about hitchhikers in horror films, that's the big one. And so we were seeing, like, the Dangerous Hitchhiker as early as 1974. But it took, like, another, like, 12 years before we got a whole movie about it.
Right. And I think it's relevant that you brought up Texas Chainsaw Massacre because when you look at the hitchhiker in that film, it is, I could smell the grossness on him. So there's a bit of a class element there as well. And I think in this film, if we do read John as a queer figure, there's that kind of association of grossness, low class, dirty, untrustworthy. So I think it's an interesting kind of reactionary look at how we might have viewed queer figures during the height of the AIDS crisis.
Well, and so we're viewing then the Rutger Hauer character as a queer man who is now being picked up by this young boy who is, let's say, discovering his sexuality.
Yeah. The way that we've chosen to read Jim is somebody who is very innocent, right? He doesn't know what he's doing. He literally references his mother as his opening line, but he's there to be corrupted. So there's definitely a reading of this where John wants to indoctrinate or help Jim to make this realization. You are just like me. You are queer.
100%. Now, for the more surface level queer aspects of this scene, though, we have quotes like, "I'm getting your car wet." Okay.
Even when he says that, though, there's a close-up of Jim looking at John, and it's just like it's Rutger Hauer's full lips with this drop of water falling off of his nose, and it looks like how you might shoot a, hey, I want to kiss those fucking lips.
Yes. Well, and then one of the next scenes, one of the next lines that we get is Jim asks him, "Well, what are you looking at me like that for?" And again, like, there's some coding there, but then,
yeah, what are you looking at me like that for?
Yeah, but Howard's reply is he waits a beat, which again, it's like an uncomfortably long beat.
Yes,
and then he's like, "Just looking." Okay.
Yeah. and it's meant to be menacing and nefarious. He obviously has ulterior motives. We're going to figure out pretty soon that he already did this to somebody else and he just murdered them, right? That's the VW bug that they drive by. But in this situation, the way we're watching it play out, it looks like a flirtatious meet cute.
Yeah, I almost think like if you didn't have the next bit where he, pulls out a knife on him and you just had if you just showed someone this scene.
Right.
I think it's easy to buy into this as like, yeah, this is a meet cute or a start of a porno.
Yeah, like we're going to stop at the next hotel.
Motel, yeah, exactly. If only they had Grindr back then, all their problems would have been solved.
There we go.
So then it starts to get a little bit more intense because we start to learn that the Hitcher is a threatening figure. And so pulls a knife on Jim. And, of course, the knife is the phallic figure. That's old hat by this point.
Sure. They
go to this construction checkpoint where they have to stop. And it's at this point where Howard grabs Howell's thigh. And we get not one but two close-up shots of this. And the first is to show us that Howard means business. The second is when this construction worker comes up to him and he looks down and notices that Howard's hand is moving closer and closer to Jim's cock.
Yeah. And of course, we know that he's actually holding a knife to his balls and dick. But from the point of view of this construction worker, and it's literally written into the film, as he's waving them through, he says, "Get going, sweethearts," because he has read this as a homosexual couple who are having a little bit of a handsy drive.
So even going back to Lindenberg's article, he writes, Not only are there overt moments of touching a thigh or phallic symbolism in gun use, the film itself reflects the extreme gay panic overtaking America in the 1980s. Jim, an all-American boy, is a cautionary tale of what will happen to us when the dangerous homosexual comes along to prey on us.
Exactly. So this is fascinating in some ways because it's obviously terrifying for Jim, but if you read this as Jim is actually a queer-coded figure, removing the threat of either being castrated or stabbed or something like this, this is a confrontational moment where he has offered this man, who he probably should not have let into his car in the first place, he's let him in, and now this man is making direct overtures on him, and he feels threatened.
Yes. And even, again, going back to this dialogue, right? We have you've got the knife. You'll stick me with it before I'm able to do anything. Okay, stick me with it? Come on, man.
100%. It's giving Deliverance vibes.
Oh my God, yes! Oh, I guess we got to cover that one day too, huh?
100%, yeah.
And yeah, construction worker says, "Get going, sweethearts," because he knows. He reads them as a queer couple.
Yeah, and of course, John plays into it, so Rutger Hauer gives him this delicious little blow of a kiss, and off we go into the next set piece.
I will say, though, first time watching this, because this movie hits the ground running, because you think, okay, we're going to get some introduction, blah, 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 the Hitcher, he's maybe going to pick up the hitchhiker at the end of the first act, and that will comprise a lot of Act 2. No.
Right.
So I'm surprised that the opening scene of this isn't mentioned more in scariest opening scenes of horror films.
Yeah, especially because we're not getting that kind of background. As you said, it hits the ground running. There is no fat. This is a surprisingly lean movie in a lot of ways. Sure, the car chasey stuff gets a little repetitive, but yeah, this opening part is so dynamic, and we haven't really praised the actors. I think Howard gets a lot of kudos for this because he is menacing, and he's always fantastic, but I think the interplay between him and Howell is really convincing, and it's electric. At times it does feel very sexual. It can be a kind of, ooh, this is scary danger. I should not be getting turned on, but I definitely am.
Agree to that. But it's funny because I agree. A lot of the praise gets put on Howell for this because he is a scary, imposing figure. I think Howell is delivering a wonderful performance in this film. And
he's the fucking anchor. He's on screen by himself for, I'd say, 75% of this movie.
100%. And he really, not saying that, it's uncommon for a male actor for a male character to be shown a vulnerable side, but there is a palpable fear in this, what's essentially a final boy character in so many of these scenes that I feel for this guy so badly.
Oh yeah, he's crying through this encounter, which is the appropriate response. This would be legitimately terrifying because this guy seems so unhinged right off the bat. But I love too that he doesn't know anything about this man, so he can't even try to bargain or barter with him for his life, because it's just I don't know what you want, because their whole thing leading up to the construction site is what do you want, where do you want me to drop you, and John is giving him nothing to work with. No,
and we'll get to his motive in a bit, but for now, we're sticking to this. He wants to fuck him.
Yeah. Okay, so we're going to move a little more rapid fire because that was the big first piece we wanted to tackle, but there's some other smaller stuff before we get to the big diner sequence. But Trace, what do you think of this family massacre?
So it's so funny. I feel like a horrible a researcher / critic for not picking this up. But what do we have? We have a gay man murdering a heterosexual nuclear family, because that is what, if not what, but the gay agenda.
Indeed. You know what? If you will not accept me, I will have to tear you down.
Again, this is something too where it's hey, we're killing kids in this movie.
Yes, we are.
We are not showing it though. So, we only see a little bit of blood on the window dripping off the floor, but we don't all we have to go off on this scene is Howell's reaction to what he is seeing.
And yeah, it's so well staged. So he checks out the car. He sees it. We do not. He runs back to his car, goes to start it, and has to stop, open the door, and barf. And that tells me everything I need to know about how just brutal these murders were. And I love it. I think this is a really smart way to do this with, taking the notes that said it's too violent, we can't show this. So you're basically doing the showing without the telling.
Well, but I do think, too, that this is probably something that would have been more graphic in Red's script.
Oh, sure. Mm-hmm.
Like, do I want to know what he did to them? Yes, but do I need to? No, because it's effective enough as it is.
Mm-hmm. And folks will acknowledge that there is also a 2007 remake. We'll talk a little bit more about it at the end, but just for shits and giggles, it is far more graphic and far more violent because, of course, we were doing that in the 2000s, but you actually do get to see these kids' bodies.
But I don't think it's like, maybe
it's not gratuitous or anything.
Yeah, I think it's maybe because by 2007, the world is more desensitized to things and violence. Sure. So, it is definitely bloodier. It's not like that bad.
No.
Okay, then moving on. So, we have another set piece where John approaches Jim at this gas station / garage type thing. It's intimidating, whatever. But then, yes, we have our first car chase of the movie with Jim essentially his car is getting topped by John's car as he keeps ramming into his ass, figuratively speaking.
Yeah, a little bumper action, if you will.
And then, of course, we have ramming the gas pumps, exploding this gas station. It's all a form of foreplay. So, yeah, the first act of this movie is all John getting to know Jim, but it's also foreplay. Although, I don't know, would you maybe read the whole movie as foreplay? Is there ever a quote-unquote sex scene between the two in this movie?
I would say it's more the tete-a-tete when they're in the cars together. So this and what happens with Nash and also the diner, I read that as the closest we come because, we've got these phallic imagery with knives and guns playing, the parts that we don't typically show in non-pornographic films. But you do raise an interesting point, and this was one of the kind of chief arguments we made at the live show, was that there's a reason that John doesn't kill Jim right away. He does this foreplay because he's a little bit different than some of the other people that John has encountered, right, Trace?
That's the thing. Okay, so so Harmon basically and Hauer came up with the idea. Okay, what is the Hitcher's motive? What is he doing? And they came up with the idea that he is a man that is so depressed that he wants to die by suicide, but he doesn't want to do it himself, so he wants someone else to do it for him, and that's what they had in their mind while they were filming this entire film.
Sure, and it makes sense, right? Like when you get to the end of the film, you can see that there are parts where John was clearly looking for Jim to kill him. But why Jim?
But here's the thing, though. So okay, I go with that. That makes a good motive, yes. But also, it takes away the fact, why, as you said, why Jim? Because he could just walk into a police station, guns a-blazing, and they would just kill him. Boom. A job well done. But no, he focuses on Jim. And we know that someone has picked him up before Jim did, because they passed that car where he's like, oh, I cut off his legs, I cut off his arms, I cut off his head. Well, okay, why didn't he do to this guy what he's doing to Jim right now?
And I can see the straight argument of this is because Jim fought back, right? He was able to kick John out of the car. He was the only one who managed to land a blow or really defend themselves. Sure, that's a reasonable response. In your and my reading of this, it's because he hasn't met another queer person. He's met someone who interests him sexually, somebody that he sees is not out, and he wants to force the issue. So he will continue to play with Jim to bring him over to the dark side, to make him more like him by acknowledging that he is queer. So that's why he allows Jim to live, to gently ease him closer to his queerness.
Which is really interesting, because whenever I've hooked up with guys who are discreet, I always look, I never I know it's not right to be okay, well, you need to you need to make someone come out. Obviously, people need to come out on their own time. But there's a part of me that, that feels where I'm well, I came out when I was 16. You should be able to do it too, which is not fair. Which is not fair.
Yes.
But I almost feel like that's John, right? He's okay, I see that you're gay, but you haven't accepted it yet. So I'm just going to put you through the ringer until you do.
Absolutely. Yeah. Maybe this will do it. No? Okay. Let's try this other tactic. Am I getting any closer? Yeah.
Exactly. So... Okay, well, why don't we go into this diner where we meet our pretty much the only female character in this movie, Nash, played by Jennifer Jason Leigh.
Yeah, so I've definitely read reviews that suggest that this is a traditional damsel in distress, albeit not in the most conventional sense, because I think Nash is actually a pretty strong character. She stands up for herself. She doesn't take shit. She's spunky, if you will. But I've seen people suggest, oh, yeah, she's the love interest for Jim. You know, we're meant to root for her and him to get together. And that's why the end is so hard. And I can kind of see that, but only from her perspective. I think if you want to read this as a love affair, it's her saying, oh, this poor boy, I could maybe love him, but oops, we keep getting terrorized by this man. But, Trace, I know you have a different read on Nash.
Well, it's just, I don't necessarily know if I read her as a lesbian per se. However, Nash is not exactly a feminine name. She is not outfitted like a quote-unquote typical woman.
Right.
She has a lot of masculine qualities to herself, including, like, she gets to use a gun later in the film when she's, like, saving Jim from the cops. So, and when it comes to the love interest thing, I mean, look, here's the thing. At no point ever does Jim try to fuck her in this movie, or does she try to fuck Jim? Now, granted,
Right.
is there ever time for that to happen? Even in the hotel room when they're both exhausted, like maybe you could argue, maybe, but I don't. I detect more of a platonic friendship. Like she sees someone in trouble and wants to help him.
Right.
I don't think it's because she has romantic feelings for him. If anything, like she's more of this like almost androgynous character.
Yeah, you know, you and I made jokes offline, you know, oh, she's got a bit of a lesbian haircut there.
Yeah.
But, I mean, this is a very 80s haircut. So when we're looking back on it, sure. But at the time, this was pretty conventional. And yet, at the same time, when you start to add up, okay, the name, the clothes, some of the mannerisms, you know, yeah, we've got women who handle guns in other films, but usually they are the heroines, right? Like that is that moment where they're, you know, coming on to their phallic energy. And, you know, there's a lot of readings that suggest that is a sort of gender fluid construction, right? When women have to take on a phallus in order to become powerful.
Right.
So even if we're not sure how she identifies, I definitely do think we can still read Nash as a gently queer-coded figure as well.
Yeah, I agree. And also, I mean, I know I mentioned final boy as a phrase earlier, but like that immediately sets this film apart and puts it in the very small group of horror films that have final boys. And I think it's impossible not to look at this film and not compare it to A Nightmare on Elm Street 2, Freddy's Revenge.
Yeah, we've got in our notes, Nash is giving big Kim Myers energy in this movie.
Except she never tries to use her love to save him.
Oh my God, let's not say that. Okay, but one other aspect of this diner sequence is, you know, she lets him in, she comforts him, she makes him a cheeseburger, and then he nearly eats a finger.
Oh, yes. And of course, I mean, look, the obvious read of this is, okay, John is fingering Jim in this scene. This scene...
in both senses of the word.
In both senses of the word. It doesn't make a lot of sense because, honestly, I don't know when he has time. I mean, like, we do get a shot of, you know, Jim's in the bathroom kind of washing off, and Nash puts the burger plate on the bar, I guess, walks away, and the camera kind of just holds on the plate for a bit.
Right.
I still don't understand how this guy got in here, put the finger in, got out, whatever. It's fine. That's where kind of Ebert's thing about this is all allegory, right? Like, you can't really take everything in this film for realism.
No. And I mean, he's too much of a character who can just kind of bamf in and do something terrible and just then disappear. And it's like magic. And I think that's part of the appeal of the film, right? He cannot be stopped. He will just keep coming back, like the Terminator, or in my notes, like AIDS, because, you know, it's just that specter. It will keep haunting you. You could not get away from it. But, you know, these kinds of scenes, they're silly. They're a little bit weird. They make you question the logic of the film, but it also makes the film memorable.
Yeah, and hold on to the AIDS metaphor, too, because we're going to come back to that.
Right, yeah. Okay, so Jim doesn't get very far at this point. He ends up getting arrested by the police, and we've got a couple of different instances where he has to interact with them, but Jim is never believed by them.
No, not at all. And this is something, I mean, look, here's the thing. I have never particularly met a nice cop. I don't know a lot of cops, but I've been pulled over a couple times in my youth. But I don't know. Is there like a regular like running gag, like a history of cops like not believing queer men? Actually, I'm sorry. Didn't we just discuss the Dahmer miniseries last year?
Yeah. And I mean, I live in Toronto where we literally had a serial killer who was preying on the queer community for more than a decade. And the queer community actively told the police, we are being targeted. You need to protect us. And we were not believed. And more men died.
I will say, though, I mean, we at least get this first cop who's like, this kid's clearly ain't a killer. Like, any fool can see that. But
yes,
he's the only one out of this bunch. And because he dies pretty much immediately in this next, well, it's not really a set piece, but, you know, Jim is locked up and he falls asleep and apparently does not hear any of the gunfight happening.
I mean, he's been through trauma, so
he's just really knocked out.
He is.
But yeah, Rutger Hauer has somehow gotten his way into this police station, killed all of the cops, to the point where the only surviving member besides Jim is a German Shepherd that is now licking the sheriff's neck.
Yeah. No sort of big queer aspect to this part, but I do love the way that this is shot. To me, it's giving strong Nightmare Logic kind of vibes.
Yeah.
A touch of little like sort of surrealism. I think this is Roger Harmon really shining as a director because it's very atmospheric.
Well, no, because honestly, and I'm not to bring up Nightmare on Elm Street again, but it's the first one. So the scene whenever Nancy is going through the high school because she's following Tina, it's shot in an ethereal way, just like that scene.
Yeah, I love that comparison.
But and I will say this, so you know, let's say instead of reading Hauer as a gay man, we're reading him as the embodiment of AIDS itself. I have to give a shout out to friend of the show, Justin Nordell, because he said, "Okay, yeah, let's run with the AIDS metaphor because then all the cops are T cells."
Oh shit. That is good.
But yeah, so okay, so we have this, and then unfortunately, yeah, so the cops show up. They think he has killed all the cops. It is at this point where Jim escapes from the police station, and he kind of like wanders off into the hills of this desert, and he contemplates suicide. Like, he holds a gun up to his chin and almost pulls the trigger.
Yeah, and, you know, as queer people, high suicide rates, struggling to deal with the ramifications of what you are, what's happening to you, maybe what someone is forcing you to reconcile within yourself. Suicide is a very real thing.
Well, that's the thing, right? Jim is forced to confront his sexuality, and he can't deal with it, and so he contemplates suicide, but wisely, well, opts against. I was going to say maybe not, because his life doesn't get better after this.
That's terrible.
It doesn't get better.
It doesn't get immediately better for Jim, but he will get there.
It gets better, but honestly not for everyone, and it probably won't for him.
Okay, that is terrible. People who are listening, especially young, impressionable queers, yes, it will get better. It's more when you have agency over your own actions. If you are being targeted by Rutger Hauer, you are not in control of your fate, but hopefully in real life, you will be able to seize the reins of your own life.
Well, I'm just happy he doesn't ever say, it can't get any worse than this at some point in this film.
Jesus Christ. Okay, let's move on to this other diner sequence, because this, I think, for me, is the biggest, queerest, best part of this movie.
No, I would agree. So yeah, basically Jim wanders into this diner, and while the owner goes back to get him some coffee, Rutger Hauer just waltzes in here and sits at the booth with him.
Yeah, so Jim has this gun, so he didn't use it on himself, but he is going to use it on John, and he's got it under the table. He's going to, you know, blow his brains through his ass. I'm like, you're starting to think with your dick in your butt there, Jim. Go for it, boy, go for it.
Yeah.
But of course, he's firing blanks.
So Rutger Hauer doesn't have a lot of like he doesn't emote a lot in this film, but the one thing that always sticks out to me, it is whenever he says, you know, the gun's empty, and he's like, yeah, and he just does this. See, this is when the visual medium of a live show helps, but he's like, yeah, and he has like this most like mocking face on him. This is when he's like,
it's so
dude,
cruel.
It's so fucked up. But and this is also too, C. Thomas Howell, and I think this is his best performance in the movie. When he pulls this trigger and he realizes he is lost, and there's something so primally upsetting about watching him realize that he has lost this battle.
Oh, it's gutting. You can just see it. And I would be remiss not to note that his hair has gotten massive and unwieldy at this point. But yeah, you said he's been put through the ringer a couple minutes ago, and it is so true, right? He has just seen it all at this point, and he finally makes the motion, right? You know, he couldn't fight back in a way that John wanted in the car. He did enough to save himself, but he wasn't actively fighting back. And here he finally makes this move. Okay, I'm ready to pull the trigger multiple times with this guy, and it doesn't work out for him.
But as if that wasn't enough, we have Hauer like grab him by his neck and basically caress him because he asks him, why are you doing this to me? And his reply, as he's like holding his head and he's licking pennies to put on his eyes.
Yeah.
You're a smart kid, figure it out. And so this is the first time we have saliva playing a part in the queerness of these characters.
There's more saliva talk in this movie than I think people realize.
Saliva play, because we'll get to that one in a minute.
Yeah.
But no, because I remember I asked you when we first watched this together, I was like, look, I know the coins on the eyes. It's like, okay, you're putting them to pay the ferryman as you're going across the river Styx, blah, blah, blah. Mm-hmm. But like, why did he do that in this film? Unless it's like, okay, maybe he's preparing him to die. And
right.
I will give a shout out to audience member Tim because I'm so mad I didn't say this. He's paying the ferryman, Joe. Ba-dum-bum-bing. Yeah, I cannot believe I didn't come across that one. But yeah, this is just so erotic.
Oh, it is. It's so sexually charged. So I mentioned at the live show, the first time I watched this, I really didn't know what to expect. I just heard, Hauer is over the top as this hitchhiker who will not leave C. Thomas Howell alone. When you get to this scene and John grabs Jim by the face, again, it's very similar to the way the "You're Getting My Car Wet" scene is filmed. Mm-hmm. It looks like they're going in for a kiss. I remember a kiss. It's not in there, but I so vividly recall it because there's a sexual charge between these two in these moments. Are they going to fight and kill each other, or are they going to fuck?
Well, because when he's doing these coins, we're behind Jim's shoulder, so we're kind of seeing Hauer. We see him lick the first coin and then put it on Jim's eye. But then I feel like this is what happens. He licks the second coin, but then he also like rubs it on Jim's lip and then puts it on the second eye.
Yeah, or he's making Jim complicit in these actions, right? He's trying to get him to be like him, so I lick it, and now you lick it.
And now we're both gay.
Exactly. This is how gay works. You lick a penny and you become gay.
I will say though, so Harmon is aware of the homoerotic like readings of this film. Mm-hmm. And in that Mail article he said, the homoeroticism, or if you want to buy into homophobia as a queer-coded villain, which we can also talk about that.
Sure, yes.
It was something that evolved during filming. It was not part of the script and was never part of the plan. It just kind of happened. But what I find kind of funny is that I like him for not pushing back on any of these queer readings of the film.
Oh no, don't call my film queer. There's nothing in there. We never meant to it. You're seeing it. You're reaching.
Yeah, so he is like, he's open to all these interpretations. However, he's more likely to fight you if you call it a horror film.
I really just don't like the word, okay?
So weird. But anyway, so let's say that we are reading Rutger Hauer as a queer villain, right? So does that make it more problematic for you as a viewer?
So here's the thing. I haven't had a huge issue with queer-coded villains or outright queer villains. Mm-hmm. I think when we start to move into trans killers, that becomes hugely problematic because they don't have any positive representation. And we should note, in 86, I don't think we had a ton of great candidates, but I think that Hauer is delivering such a fascinating kind of... You said he doesn't deliver a big range, but I do think that this is an interestingly nuanced performance by him because of these intimacy. Like, I very firmly believe that he has this kind of charged backstory in mind for John Ryder, and I think it comes out really strongly. So even though, in our reading of these two characters as queer, it's not positive. I don't have a problem with him.
I'm kind of the same way, look, if Rutger Hauer, and not to stereotype like effeminate gay man, but if Rutger Hauer was running around like as a quote unquote sissy boy, I would be more offended by that portrayal of it, I guess. But I can't really quite describe why.
That's your internalized homophobia.
Yeah, that's probably what it is.
But the reality is this is a butch queer killer, right? And there's something kind of fascinating about that.
Yeah, I agree. Okay, so we'll go through. We have a couple more things before we get to the next big set piece. But Jim finds his way on a bus again that is housing Nash, who is on her way somewhere in West Texas.
She's going to and from work on this weird charter bus.
Well, she knows everyone. She knows all the cops. She knows the bus driver. This is a small Texas town. Like, I get it, but it's just kind of like, okay.
Sure.
But Jim grabs her, hides her in the bathroom. So, of course, the bathroom holds a special place in many a gay man's heart.
Especially if you're out on the highway.
Honestly, I'm surprised we don't have a truck stop in this movie.
Right? I mean, I think the gas stations and the diners are meant to connote that. But yeah, I think if we had a queer director or someone who wanted to lean into this aspect of the story more, we would have had a rest stop.
Yeah, no, I'm in complete agreement with that. But honestly, though, this is leading into the next saliva set piece, which...
Oh, boy.
Okay, so the cops pull this bus over. They have Jim come out, and they're... Basically, this cop is pissed off. He's like, you killed all my friends.
Mm-hmm.
He's gonna shoot Jim. He's just gonna take the law into his own hands. But before he does so, he says, "You spit on my hand, wipe it off." And I know we said we weren't really reading much of a BDSM I guess between Hauer and Jim, but This feels more BDSM than anything that Hauer does.
Yeah, I mean, the default conventional reading of this is, oh, this cop is just looking for an excuse to shoot Jim, which is something that Nash clues into very quickly, and that's why she ends up firing the gun and they take off and so on. But this choice of words, if we are reading Jim as a queer man, it feels like this guy is cluing into it because he's disgusted by the idea that Jim might have gotten his dirty gay saliva on him. Like, he could have said anything to justify shooting him, and instead he chooses, ooh, your dirty gay germs.
Exactly. And it's, I mean, like that's not the reason he's killing him, but it's definitely a part of the reason he wants to kill him.
Mm-hmm. And also, straight people were terrified of queer people because of AIDS, and how is AIDS contracted?
Right. You can get it on a toilet seat. You can get it from kissing. You can get it from just, touching someone, right?
Yes. All of those things are 100% true, and definitely should not be researched for their factual nature.
So, now we go to this hotel room scene, which leads to what I would assume is the film's most infamous set piece, right?
Yeah, and of course, folks, we're jumping over the helicopter chase sequence and the cars going boom in slow-mo. Good stuff, not as pertinent to our podcast.
No, it's a fun action scene. It's a little long, but you know what? It's shot well, it looks well, the money was put to good use.
Absolutely. Let's get down to the non-fucking.
Yeah, okay. They get this hotel room, and again, I feel like, I don't even want to say a lesser movie, but a different movie would have had these two fuck in this scene.
Yeah, I mean, you said this earlier, there was no good time for them to have done this. Obviously, this would have been the moment, and it's not as though people who are grieving or traumatized don't end up leaning into the emotional and physical connection of having sex at these kind of weird or uncertain moments. So I think they could have done it. This would have been the place to do it. The fact that they don't just gives our theories more credit.
I agree with that. And here's the thing, though. Hauer somehow gets in this room. It's a really, really good reveal shot.
Bams, I'm telling you.
Yeah, he exactly. But he gets into bed with Nash. He looks up at the ceiling and he looks very sad for a moment. He's like, I don't want to have to do this, but I will do this.
You know what? This is the only way to drag that young baby gay kicking and screaming out of the closet. I'm going to have to kill this woman.
Well, he's like, if he comes out of that shower, because Jim is showering at this point, he's going to fuck her, and I cannot let that happen.
It's true. It will only confuse him more.
But, okay, actually, I didn't even think about this. So, because what happens is, he gets into bed with Nash, and he starts, holding her and spooning her. Mm-hmm. Because what happens is she caresses his hand back, and she kind of, kisses it. That's when he decides he's going to grab her. I'm sorry, that's when he does grab her. I almost wonder if she had just, not acted on anything, if he would have left her, because then she therefore wasn't a threat to Jim's sexuality.
Or he's repulsed by her, and he thinks, okay, you know what? You're the closest to forming a connection with this guy, and how dare you kiss my hand?
I guess, though, this next scene is kind of the closest to a sex scene we get, because the second diner scene is pretty intimate, but then this is intimate because there is a climax to it of sorts.
Oh, sure. Yeah. It's the final showdown in this truck cab, do I believe for a moment that any police officer would ever let a civilian become a hostage negotiator?
No.
Hollywood, you rang?
Okay, so I didn't have much about the production of this film, like little anecdotes, but there is one. So, according to the Mel article, and this is a quote from Harmon, but there weren't really any issues during filming except during this scene. And as we've mentioned, all the producers had an issue with this scene, all the studios had an issue with this scene, the director had an issue with this scene. We did not want to see this girl get ripped in half, and we don't. But
sure,
Hauer did not have an issue with this scene up until the day of filming, and he basically holed himself up in his trailer and refused to come out. And so he's halting production. And so Harmon has to go in and he's like, hey, man, we have a scene to shoot. What's going on? And Hauer, he's apologizing. He's like, I'm so sorry. I can't believe I didn't think about this before, but I can't do this scene the way it's written. And what I guess I didn't realize is Hauer is, in his mind, he doesn't think he ever plays bad guys, because this is something that he told C. Thomas Howell on the set. He's like, I never play bad guys, and he just left it at that. And on a level, I get it. It's kind of like, okay, like the scariest villains are the ones who don't view their actions as villainous. And
right.
I kind of maybe hope that's what Hauer is getting at with that. But
oh, sure, yeah, for him to embody this character, he has to play him as a human being, not, oh, I'm the big scary villain. It's such a sort of outrageous thing to say. Right. But so he's like, I cannot play this scene the way it's written, because if I do, then it makes me the bad guy. And yes, sir. Harmon had to stifle a laugh, because he's like, yeah, what the fuck movie do you think we're making here? So Hauer says, I'm going to add all these lines to this script. And he did. He literally said, I'm going to say this, this, and this, and this. I'm going to do this, this, and this, and this. And Harmon at this point is getting nervous, because he's like, he is literally ruining this scene. But if I tell him I won't do that, he's not going to come out and shoot the scene. Right. So he says, you know what, Rutger? Okay, we're going to do it your way. So he shoots the scene with all of Hauer's additions. And then in the editing process during post-production, cuts all of them out. And he never talked to Hauer about it, and Hauer never mentioned it to him whenever they saw him, because they actually remained friends up until Hauer's death a couple years ago. Wow. I mean, I just don't think you could do anything differently. You certainly can't have John give some kind of rationale or a backstory. It's not the time or the place for that. So the way that this comes together is magnificent. There's a reason that Ebert gave this film 0 stars, and it is this. It's the piece of the film that everyone remembers. But again, you don't see it. So he pulls. You see her get tugged, and then the film basically fades to black. Correct. Yeah. Yeah. And in that 2007 remake, you do get to see everything. And I wouldn't say that it's more or less satisfying. I mean, it's definitely way gorier. Yeah. But I don't think anything is lost by not seeing it and just getting this fade to black. I think it's very effective. And I don't think anything is gained by seeing it in that remake. So again, I'm fine with either version of it. Yeah. But all this to say, Nash had to die because she was not the right person. We could afford to sacrifice her because Jim was not actually attracted to her. Yeah. Yeah. So, okay, then we get what, to me, honestly, is the queerest part of this movie. I love that this is what you have landed on. Okay, here's the thing. Playing with saliva, with your fingers. And honestly, it's kind of a loogie, too. It's just so gross. This is disgusting. This is not a polite spit. No. So John gets arrested. Jim gets to go in again. He's just allowed in to say some things. Captain Estridge, by the way, played by The Walking Dead's Jeffrey DeMunn. He's like, yeah, sure. Go on in there. Talk to this hostage. Head on in. Yeah. And yeah, Jim just fully spits in his face. And in any other film, what you would expect would be repulsion, no reaction at all. And instead what we get is John playing with it, caressing it. Yes. In a pornographic version of this, he licks his finger. Yes, I'm legit surprised he didn't. But also the camera holds on him, just looking at this saliva, because maybe at this point he maybe thinks that this is the closest he'll get to actually fucking him. Well, I mean, he just got a facial. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, not the one he wanted, but it's close enough. Oh boy.
But even but again, it's not just us that's noticing this. It's not just the Globe and Mail that's noticing this. Captain Estridge flat out tells Jim, "There's something strange between you two. I don't know what it is, and I don't want to know." And I will say, because we did get to watch this screening before our live show at Salem Horror Fest, and this line got so many laughs from the audience.
100%. Oh, dude's in the know. He's basically saying, "Don't ask, don't tell."
Yes, exactly. That's exactly what he's saying. I mean, y'all, this movie is so fucking gay.
It's so gay. Okay, but it's also almost done. So all we've got left is John's death. And, if we see this spit facial as a step in the right direction for Jim, the fact that he didn't fuck Nash as a step in the right direction, well, the only thing better could be a little bit of shotgunny penetration.
Yep. So they don't even show how Howard gets out of. I mean, he opens the door, but how does he get rid of the cops in this?
Magic!
Yeah, we don't see it. We just have to go buy into it because why not?
Why not?
But yeah, so he jumps into this car, and Jim quickly shits him out.
Oh my God. It is so amazing. Watching this on the big screen was a delight. So seeing John just jump through the windshield, and it's kind of a hey baby moment, hey, I'm back in your car. Did you miss me? Look, here I am. And Jim just hits the brake and he goes back out the window again.
Yes. Oh my God. Okay, I'm sorry. I have to cut us off right now because I forgot. You mentioned saying, when you saw it on the big screen, it was a good experience. Because I agree, because I like to watch movies on the big screen, especially if I've already seen them on the small screen, because often I will notice things that I didn't notice before, because you have that attention span on the big screen.
Sure. I
forgot to mention that Hauer is constantly playing with a white handkerchief, especially in the first half of this film.
Trace literally, in the middle of this screening, reaches over, nudges me, and goes, "Hey, white hanky."
Yeah. And of course, everyone, if you don't know, in the leather bar scene, in the days of yore, in the 70s, the gay men would put color-coded hankies in their back pockets to let the other men in the area know what they were into. So, of course, yellow was obviously for piss play. White, I had to look it up during the live show. Like, Joe was talking, and I was like, okay, let me go and like look up what white hanky means.
Yeah, let me fill up this dead air as you look it up.
Yes, it was mutual masturbation. It's jacking each other off. And that's exactly what Hauer and Howell are doing to each other in this movie.
That's so sweet. There's something so endearing about it. Even, down to, yes, I recognize there's a bunch of people absolutely rolling their eyes. Sure, that's fine. But even these small little moments, and again, it's not just us. When I was reading Lindenberg's piece, he noticed that after Jim has shot John, you see him kick the body, as you are apt to see in plenty of horror films. He nudges him with the gun. But there's also this moment where he trails the gun through John's hair, and it looks like a caress. It's affectionate.
Yeah, but he's finally coming out. He's coming out of his shell. Now he can kill this old gay man because the younger generation is taking over.
Yes, that is the message of this film.
Out with the old, in with the new.
There we go. All we're missing is Jim's pride parade.
Yeah. And then it just ends, right? He walks over to his car and he the credits just start rolling. And I mean, this isn't really a happy ending though.
No, it's true. I mean, as you said, this is not the most enjoyable film in terms of it's pretty nihilistic. It's very bleak. I don't find it scary, but it is frequently tense and it's overwhelming. I feel exhausted after watching this.
I was going to say exhausting is the word I would use. I don't ever, look, watching this 4 or 5 times in a week was a lot, and I will never watch this movie again for a very long time because it is exhausting.
I will never watch this film again. For a very long time. ever. Give me a year.
But okay, well, so we're kind of heading towards the end here, but let's just briefly touch on the sequel and the remake because
okay,
okay, everyone. Here's the thing: the sequel. It's 2003. It was direct to video. I will give it this. It doesn't look as cheap as I expected it to look for being a direct to video sequel to The Hitcher. It does have a terrible script.
Oh, yeah.
But we have C. Thomas Howell, who returns, and he is somehow a cop who is still struggling from major PTSD from this event. The opening scene of the film is him shooting a hitchhiker who is not well, but instead of arresting him, he shoots him. And how did he pass his psych exam on his police evaluation?
Oh, absolutely not. And he also has a girlfriend who will inherit the film when he is unceremoniously killed by Jake Busey at the 40-minute mark.
Yes.
The girlfriend is Kari Wurr, and we are led to believe in the early, basically first act of this film, that Jim never told her anything about this. So she just thinks that he's a violent cop.
Well, and she's still with him, and she still loves him a lot.
I just think you need therapy.
It is wild. Well, because basically what happens is, like, after he kills this random hitchhiker, he's put on, like, a suspension of sorts.
To be clear, the random hitchhiker was an abductor and killer of children. He's not just randomly driving around killing hitchhikers.
Yes. But so what happens is, his girlfriend, Kari Wurr, she's fixing planes. She's like, well, let's go somewhere. I'll fly you in my plane. And he goes, I'm going to go see my good friend Captain Estridge, the Jeffrey DeMunn character from the first film, and we're gonna go say hi. And
it's the only person who understands him, Trace.
Yes, they pick up Jake Busey. He, attacks them. He then finds his way to Jeffrey DeMunn's house and kills him. But I should point out, it's not Jeffrey DeMunn in the movie. Jeffrey DeMunn is the character is shot from below the neck, so you can't see the actor's face.
Yeah, or you're seeing it in profile with very dim lighting, so it kind of looks like Jeffrey DeMunn, but it's very clearly not because he did not come back for this film.
But yeah, so Jim gets killed by Jake Busey by Thomas Howell. Apparently, when he agreed to do this, there was going to be more involvement from Rutger Hauer in the film. I don't know how that was going to happen.
No.
The Jake Busey character has no connection to the Rutger Hauer character. He's, again, just another Hitcher who is psychotic.
And he's been waiting, because he literally says, I've been waiting.
But he says
it
in
what?
He says it in a nightmare sequence. So that's Jim projecting that. But here's the thing. He has this, like, it's the thing where he's in the car and, the Hitcher attacks him and he's like, I've been waiting. And then, oops, Jim snaps out of it. It's all been a nightmare. Mm-hmm. Okay.
Sure.
In his dream, Jake Busey pulls out a gun, like a really long-barreled gun. Like it's a very unique-looking one.
And it's very phallic.
Yes, very much so. But when he does actually pull out a gun 5 minutes later in this scene, it's the same fucking gun.
It is.
Which means that Jim somehow psychically knew exactly what this gun was going to look like.
Well, Trace, there's a connection between those two men, and I don't know what it is, and I don't want to know what it is.
But anyway, he dies. Kari Wurr takes over. She's getting framed. Jake Busey locks her in a water tower that's going to collapse at one point.
There's some okay stuff. Like, I mean, I'm cutting you off because at the end of the day, we don't need to spoil the entire film. If people want to check it out, it's available. It's not terrible. Like, don't rush out and see it or anything, but if you're remotely curious, it's fine.
It's a 2-star film for me, but like I was expecting a 1-star film.
Here's the thing. We also watched it together and we were cackling.
Oh, it's so funny.
Kari Wurr.
The Rutger.
She is saddled with terrible dialogue, and she also cannot convincingly deliver it. So there was some good campy moments for you and I to just kind of cackle like schoolgirls at.
100%. But what doesn't have any campy elements is that Platinum Dunes remake from 2007, which I'm not going to lie. I mean, I remember thinking it was fine because I did see it in theaters. I actually quite liked it on this rewatch.
Oh, yeah. I thought I had seen it, and I think it was another one of these where I watch parts of it and not the whole thing. I really enjoyed this too. I think it's doing enough homages to the original. They're trying to update some of these set pieces. I did love the fact that since we're in an age where cell phones exist, we have to have them be very flimsy so that Sean Bean can just
break it in half.
That's one way to do it.
Oh man, yeah,
but it's a good time. I think if we're being honest, the remake has a higher rewatchability factor, so I do rate it higher because the gore is good, it's stylish, the clothing is absolutely ridiculous because we are talking men with flared jeans, which was an iconic time in my life.
Doesn't Sophia Bush wear a jean skirt?
She does. She wears a very short jean skirt for the entire film, and I felt bad for her because it looked cold.
Wait, in Texas? Oh, wait, I'm sorry.
It's shot in California.
They're in New Mexico. Sorry, because they start out in Austin, Texas, but by the time
Yes.
they pick up the Hitcher, it is they're in New Mexico. But yeah, I agree. I mean, to me, the remake is a very fun movie, and I don't think the original is a fun movie. And so, if you're a huge like purist of the original, then that's probably going to turn you off, right? Like this movie shouldn't be fun. It should be nihilistic. It should be upsetting. But that being said, though, like for what it is, I enjoy it a lot.
Yeah, no, it's a good time. And particularly if you're in a Hitcher frame of mind, watching the 3 films in a short period of time was pretty enjoyable.
Yeah, I agree. Look at us getting along.
Okay, so one thing we did not have time to do at the live show because we ran out of time, but I would love to do with you as one final wrap up.
Okay.
Is play a quick little game, a Battle of the Villains, Trace. So one other film that we have talked about, which actually would pair very nicely with either the remake or the original, is Joyride from 2001. Mm-hmm. So I would like you to tell me who is the best villain. John, the Rutger Hauer character from 86, John from the 07 remake, or Rusty Nail from Joyride 2001.
I think the best villain in terms of just sheer intimidation is John from the 1986 Hitcher.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
Then Rusty Nail, and then John from the remake. And not because Sean Bean isn't good in the role, and that, but they do explain more of him, and they give him like kind of a backstory, but not really. But then like even like you know how I was not complaining, but I was commenting how like how does Rutger Hauer get out of this police car?
Yes.
Well, we see him like break his thumb to get out of the handcuffs in the remake, and I was like, it makes it. I mean, again, it's something times where more is less, you know.
Yeah, and points off for that scene because it definitely looked like we were headed for a degloving, and then we don't get it.
Yeah. Or because as last year's the Texas Chainsaw Massacre movie got me like prime for, breaking someone's arm and stabbing them with the bone shard.
Yes. Oh my gosh. So I will confess, I think I would rate Rusty Nail first, in part because he's doing so much with just vocal affectation.
No, I agree with you. And I think, though, that there's more of a mystery to John in 86, which is why I rank him higher. But that's not to say that Rusty Nail is not a great villain.
Yeah, because the other piece that I like about that character is he develops this air of mystery around him when he attacks people, and you see the brute force of what he's capable of. Yeah. And the fact that we don't really get to see much of him is very enticing to me.
That's another movie too, though. I mean, honestly, where there is gore in that movie, but it's very brief, it's very fleeting, and I feel like Roger Ebert gave that a good review.
He was wildly inconsistent.
I mean, and also because the girl, I mean, I know it's brothers in that movie, but like the girl is, tied up, damsel in distress. She's going to have a shotgun pulled back at. Oh, she doesn't die, though. That's the difference.
She does not. No. And also, how dare you call her the girl? That is Lily Sobieski. You put her name in your mouth.
Also, Roger Ebert gave Joyride a 3.5 out of 4 and called it a first-rate pure thriller.
You know what? Maybe he just needed 15 years to come around.
Yeah. But also, I guess that movie is more fun, right? Like, it doesn't have that nihilistic feel that the Hitcher does.
Ooh, I don't know. Folks, go back and re-listen to our episode, because I feel like Trace was singing a different tune then.
Maybe. Well, because I hadn't rewatched The Hitcher yet.
There we go. You know what? There we go.
All right, everyone. Well, that has been The Hitcher, our redo of our live episode, so hopefully you've enjoyed it. Before we announce what we're covering next week, if you want to get in touch with us, please reach us on Twitter and Instagram at HorrorQueers. Shoot us an email at horrorqueers@gmail.com. Find us on Letterboxd to keep track of all the films we've covered. Go to our YouTube channel to check out our interviews with various horror filmmakers, as well as our most anticipated films of each month. If you want to chat with other listeners, please join our Facebook Horror Queers group. If you have a moment, please rate and review us on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. And if you want even more content, please support the show by becoming a patron at patreon.com/horrorqueers. We are now in June. So go sign up now and you will get, if you sign up at the highest level, you will get 244 hours of extra content. That is all the Patreon episodes we've done over the past 4 or 5 years. This month, we are catching up on horror TV with a discussion of both Slasher Ripper on Shudder and Season 2 of Yellow Jackets on Showtime. As for movies, we've got Rob Savage's Stephen King adaptation The Boogeyman and the all-black cast slasher film The Blackening. Our audio commentary for the month will be on the aquatic slasher sequel Jaws 2, just in time for its 45th anniversary.
Ooh.
Yes, but Joe, what are we going to be talking about next week?
Oh my god. We're heading into July, and we're getting a legacy sequel in theaters that you and I were not sure we were ever going to get. So to coincide with the release of Insidious 5, The Red Door, we are going to check out Insidious Chapter 2, because, of course, folks, we already have an episode on Insidious 1 on the Patreon if you want to watch along with us. It's our audio commentary. But yeah, so we're going to check out some problematic trans characters with Insidious Chapter 2 next week.
You say trans, but I don't even know. But that's the problem.
That's the problem. And yeah, it is an issue, but yeah, that's what we're going to look at next week.
It is some silly, campy fun with, plenty of problematic aspects to discuss.
Indeed, yes. And it's a film that we both quite like, with reservation around those issues.
For sure. But all right, until then, we can cross out The Hitcher.
Indeed. And cross out horror queers. The redo.
Atlas Avenue, a long stretch of road that encompasses everything the city of Kennett Heights has to offer. Neon lights, traffic, crime, the hustle and bustle of everyday life, and the craziest of characters. My office was above it all. My name is James Locke, and I'm a PI.
Hello, Mr. J. How the hell you doing today?
Good, Edith. Nearly every year I have a new case. New people to meet, new clues to discover, and new problems to solve. But I do it the old-fashioned way. No technology. Nothing post-1950. Hell, I don't even listen to podcasts, but you should. Atlas Avenue Beat is a spoof of the film noir genre with goofy characters, tons of wordplay, and non-stop raunchy humor. There's also 3 whole seasons out right now with more on the way. Just search for Atlas Avenue Beat wherever you listen to podcasts or visit us online at bloody.fm.